Hi everyone. In this tutorial, we're going to look at what is probably the most important tool for graphic designers in Adobe Illustrator, and that's the pen tool. Now we're going to work on a project where we're actually using the pen tool to trace an image manually. And we're also going to look in AI image generation, so kind of a secondary process to learn for graphic designers if you're into that type of thing. So there's plenty of AI image generators out there. For this tutorial, I'm going to look at using Google AI Studio, and you can see the URL at the top left, aistudio.google.com, and you have to have a Google account to use it. So there's two different models, the Nano Banana and Imagen. Nano Banana, I believe, it's more for photo editing, whereas Imagen is more for generating images. So I'm going to use Imagen. And this is where you describe, in this case, we're going to use a landscape scene. You can use something that is very earthy, normal landscape, or something more fantastical, sci-fi. But for this project, I would recommend not getting too detailed, keeping the landscape pretty straightforward, but still interesting, of course. All right, so with something like this, I'm just going to try prompting right now. So I'm going to go for a snowy, barren landscape with strange, broken machines covered in snow and it doesn't have to be great English either, with the northern lights shining in the sky. So and then you can change the aspect ratio. So for this, I'm actually going to use 16:9. Actually, no, I'll do a 4:3. So something that has more width than height. So I'm going to click on 4:3, and output resolution, I'm just going to go ahead and do 2K, so it's a little higher resolution. I'm going to press run, and then we'll speed this up. Okay, so this is the first image that was generated. It actually looks pretty cool, so I'm just going to go ahead and use it. All right, so there's a little button here to download. So I'm going to download the image, and I'm going to put it in my folder here. And then I'm going to open Illustrator. You should already know how to open Illustrator by now. It's in your Applications folder. And I'm going to click on New File. And we are going to use a tabloid size artboard, which is 11:17. In this case, we're going to have it portrait orientation. So I'm actually going to stack the images above each other. And you'll see what I mean by that in a bit. So I'll just title this Landscape Tracing. And then we're going to keep it with RGB color and screen because we're not printing these. So 11:17, one artboard, RGB, screen, create. Okay, so we have our artboard here. Now we need to put the image that we just downloaded into this artboard. I know you probably won't be able to see it in this tutorial, but I'm going to go up to File at the top, and I'm going to click on Place. So this is where we can place an image. And I can find in my documents, again, I'm using Mac, so that's why everything looks the way it is. And when I use keyboard shortcuts, I'll say Command C or Command V instead of Control, like what would be on Windows. All right, so we have our PNG landscape that we generated, and I'm going to press Place. And it's not going to put it in there yet. It's going to change my cursor. So as I'm moving it around, I can either click once. If I do that, it will place it at the full size, which obviously is very big. If I want to scale it down, I have to move my cursor over to one of the corners and scale down. But notice, as I move it around, it's easy to accidentally squish or stretch the image. We do not want that. That is one of the biggest design rules. Do not squish or stretch your images and text too. So in order to keep the correct proportions, I actually have to hold down Shift while I'm clicking and dragging. So I haven't let up my finger off of the mouse. So I'm gonna just press and hold down Shift on the keyboard. And you'll notice now, no matter where I move the mouse, you see it scales it up or down proportionally. That's very important. Now I need to move it over. I might do it again. So I'm gonna click and hold down and drag, but I'm gonna also hold down Shift to constrain the proportions so it doesn't get stretched. And then just put your image in the tabloid artboard. I would start with one at the top, and then just having it centered. Don't put the image all the way to the edges. Have a nice border around it, okay? So now the image is placed in it that way. Now I do want to show one other way of doing this that's actually a little easier. So I'm going to delete this. I just had it selected and I pressed delete to delete the image. So I'm going to go back up to File and Place. Let me select that image again. This time, instead of clicking once and then it places it at full size, I can actually click and drag the size that I want it to be. So I'm clicking and holding and dragging my mouse, and then I let go, and that size rectangle that I just made, that's going to be the size of the image as it gets placed. Okay. Now, I want to have, at the end of the day, the original image that I downloaded, I generated, and then the traced version side by side, in this case above and below. So I'm going to leave this one here, but I'm going to copy and paste it. So keyboard shortcut, make sure you have it selected, Command C to copy, and then Command V to paste. So I'm going to move this one down, and then the bottom one is what I will use to actually start doing the tracing. Okay, so that's everything for the images and getting set up in Illustrator. Next up, for the meat of this tutorial, it's going to be about using the pen tool. All right, so the pen tool over here under Tool Palette, also keyboard shortcut P. If I click on that, and you'll notice I'm using, if I click up on the top right, you can switch the workspace. I'm using Essentials Classic. I recommend you do the same. Yours is probably defaulting to Essentials. Change it to Essentials Classic, so that way you see these tools up at the top. Left and right, I have these two squares here, a solid white square and a black square beside it. Again, this is the fill and the stroke color. So right now the settings are, if I make any shape with a pen tool or the ellipse tool or anything, the fill, the center of it, is going to be white, and there's going to be a black 1-point stroke around the shape. So if I'm just going to click out here to demonstrate. So I'll get into what I'm doing with the pen tool in a bit, but with these settings, you see, I know it's a little bit difficult to see the black stroke, but there's the black stroke and there's the white fill. Now, these can be changed at any time before you make a shape or as you want to edit shapes. So in this case, if I go to my selection tool and I select the shape that I just made with the pen tool, I can change the fill color. Let's just do red, change the stroke color, do yellow, and the yellow stroke is very thin, so just so you can see it better, I'm going to increase it, increasing the point size. So we have the red fill, yellow 14-point stroke around it for this shape. Okay, I'm going to delete that. For the pen tool and getting started in tracing the image. One other thing we need to cover before we get into actually using a pen tool is layers. So you should have a layers window. If you don't see a window over here, this little tab that says layers, and you might not see it. If you don't see it, you have to go to window up at the top. I know you probably can't see it in this tutorial, but there's a tab that says window. I'm going to click on that, and then mine is visible, so that's why I see a little check mark beside it. If you don't see layers, just click on layers, and in my case, I removed it because it was already visible. But this, as an example, I'll go back to window, layers, click on that to see all the layers that you have here. Okay. Layers is how you organize your designs that have lots of different shapes. So right now, we're working with one layer. When you open up a new document in Illustrator, it's only going to have one layer. If you want to add more layers, you go down to the bottom, and there's this little square, and I'm going to actually move my screen up a little bit so you can see it better. The bottom of the square and a little plus symbol, and it says create new layer. If I click on that, now I just added layer 2. So layer 1 and layer 2. As you're working and as you're tracing your landscapes and you're building lots of shapes on top of shapes, it's going to be important to organize them and have them on different layers. Like I might have a sky layer, I might have a kind of machine layer, I might have a shadow layer at the bottom here, or just a layer for everything on the ground. Whatever, it depends on what your image is and what is easiest to make sense of how things are organized. Also, when you make shapes, I'm going to make a few shapes here, and I'm just going to change the fill color so it's easier to make sense of them all. Illustrator organizes these as back and front. So you'll notice if I overlap them, as I made these new rectangle shapes, the newer ones are in front of the older ones. So the red one I made first, it's in the back, then the blue one is on top of that, orange one on top of that, and so forth. These can be moved around, but it also works similarly in your layers. So if I add a new layer, layer 3, and don't worry about what I did just there. That's a little bit more, we're not gonna go into using all the little features there, but I changed this small rectangle from layer 2 to layer 3. Actually, let me try that again. I'm gonna do the red one as an example. So right now, the red one, you see when I select it, it's highlighted and it has a little red square here. Any shape, if I select the blue rectangle, it's showing this red line that's selecting it. That corresponds with the red square we have for layer 2, and you can see each layer has its own color. So that's how you know when you click on a shape what layer it's on. Also, if I click back on this green rectangle, it will select layer 3 because I had moved it to layer 3. Right now, the red large rectangle is in the back. If I move this to layer 3, so right now it's on layer 2. If I move it to layer 3, suddenly it's covering everything else. It's in front. So even though I made it first, I can change if it sits in front or behind other shapes. So the layers, whatever is the higher layer, and it doesn't matter the number, because that's just the name. The order in which you see it from top to bottom, that is the order in which things will either be above or below, in front or behind other objects. So since layer 3 is the topmost layer, that's why this red rectangle, which is in layer 3, it is above all the other shapes. Okay, so I'm going to delete all those. Now, we can finally get into talking about the pen tool. And we're going to start tracing this bottom version of the image. So I'm going to lock layer 1. You can also see there's a little thumbnail icon preview of what the layer looks like. So I can just barely see that layer 1 has both of these images in it. In this space to the right of the eyeball, I can click in there and it creates a little lock symbol. When I lock it, I can't select, I can't move this around. If I unlock it, I can click and move it around. If I press lock, it cannot be edited. This is just to keep things safe, because as you're clicking around, moving shapes, adding stuff, you don't want to accidentally move something and mess things up. So it's for safety that you lock a layer and then it can't be edited. Also, the eyeball just means visibility for a layer. So if I click on the eyeball, it makes that layer invisible. It turns it off, so I can't see anything. Now, of course, I want to see it right now, so I'm going to turn it back on. All right, so layer 1 is locked. I can't do anything to it, so I'm going to click on layer 2. Now I'm going to start tracing. So, pen tool. Pen tool works by making points and paths. If I click once with my pen tool, you see a little anchor point was added. And then as I move, and I'm not holding down, I just clicked once and I'm moving my pen tool around, and wherever I move the cursor, it's being followed by this red line. It's showing me where the line's going to go when I make the next point. So let's just say I put it over here and I click, and again I have the yellow stroke, and the stroke is defined by the path between 2 points. So I clicked once at the start, and then I clicked a second time. So those are the 2 anchor points, the first anchor point, second anchor point, and then it creates a line, a path between those 2 anchor points. Now there's no fill yet because there's nothing inside the line. It's just a line between 2 points. Now I'm going to make a triangle. So I can click once more anywhere, make a third anchor point, and now we see the 2 lines with the yellow stroke, and we see the red fill because now there's a space inside of these paths that can be filled. Now I'm not done yet, because you'll notice it still has this red line that's following my cursor around. And this edge, this side of the triangle, does not have a yellow stroke. What you need to do is close the shape. So when you're done making your shape, whatever shape it is, in this case it's just a simple triangle, whatever shape it is, no matter how complicated, you need to eventually get back around to that first point that you made. And that's how you close this shape. So it'll snap the cursor to that point when I get close to it. And I can click on it. You'll also notice, you'll see the cursor changes when I go over that first anchor point. There's a little circle that appears beside the pen tool cursor. That means I can now close the shape. So I'm going to click on that. And now the red line has gone away. And we're left with a completed closed shape. Triangle with yellow stroke and red fill. So this process is the basis on how just about every graphic is made. Now, of course, there are other tools that we've looked at in Illustrator, but logos and other things, these are made with the pen tool because you get these perfect lines and paths and fills. Okay. So obviously a triangle is just 3 points, but as you saw me do earlier, I'm just clicking around a bunch, random places all around here, just to show you that I'm making tons of anchor points. And I don't know what shape I'm making, kind of like a dinosaur or amoeba or something. And I closed it. I went all the way back to that very first point that I made. And so now I have a shape that's more complicated than a triangle just because it has more anchor points and more paths as a result. So just like that, if I wanted to start tracing, let's say I'm going to trace part of this machine over here. Now I'm not going to do it the correct way yet. I'm just doing it as an example. Let's say I start at one point here and I go, and I'll just trace kind of solid lines around here. So just like that, I'm tracing around that image, or around that piece of that image, that strange broken machine. That is the process for tracing. Now, again, that's not the correct process because we still have a lot more to cover, but as far as making the paths, making the points, having a stroke and fill, this is what you're going to be doing with the pen tool. And you probably will be surprised by how much you use this going forward. Okay, so I'm going to delete that. Next up, we need to look at Bezier curves, because that process I just did with the pen tool, where I'm just clicking around and it's making these straight lines, straight paths between the points. That's great, but you'll notice like this aurora here that has curves, or the shadow that might have a little curve around here. It's not going to look good to do an image trace with these like jagged lines everywhere. So you have to get used to using Bezier curves with the pen tool. If you submit this project and you only have these jagged straight lines, it will not look good. That is not what we're going for. Okay, so just as an example, before I just clicked once and made points that were then connected with paths in between. Instead of just clicking once and letting go and making a point, I'm gonna do that at the beginning. So let's just say I start here. Instead of clicking once, I'm going to click and hold down and then drag my mouse around. And you'll see what happens when I do that. So I made that first anchor point. I'm going to make the second one, but I'm not going to click once. I'm going to click and hold down, and then I'm going to drag the cursor. And you see, as I do that, now it's no longer that straight line path between those points. Now I can make a curve. This is a Bezier curve. So I'll just make a curve like this. And then you'll also notice the curve wants to continue so that it makes it smooth and perfect. So I'm not holding down anymore. After I got the curve the way I wanted, I let up on my mouse. And now as I move the mouse around, you'll see it still has this red line, which in the past was just a straight line, but now it maintains a curve, which is fine for now. We'll look at how to get rid of that in a second. But let's say I want to do something we'll just basically make something similar to a circle. So now I'm gonna click and hold down, and it actually, the curve was pretty good as it is. I don't have to change much. Let's come over here, click, hold down, drag it out, and then have to complete the shape. And there we go. So that's how you get curves. Now, there's a few little things you need to know about getting curves the way you want it. Let's do a little more complicated shape just as an example. So I'll just kind of make something like an amoeba, something really crazy right now, to show you how it can get complicated, just like I did with the other shape. All right, so this is my amoeba. So I'm moving it all around. It doesn't have to be something that's like smooth like the circle. It can be other types of curves that eventually get something that looks smoother than those jagged straight lines. Now again, the straight lines, they're fine if you're tracing something with a straight line. But a lot of these things like the aurora in this picture do not have a straight line and therefore need to have these smoother curves. Okay, I'm going to delete that again. Now, let's say, I'm going to try to find an example here in the photo. Okay, let's just do this. So I'm going to trace the shadow. So I'm going to click once at this point, the edge of the shadow, and then there's a slight curve here. It's not a perfectly straight line, so I'm just going to have a slight curve. And actually, it's funny, this might actually work. Let's just keep going around, and eventually we'll get to a point where we don't want it. Okay, so some of the issues you can see happening here, obviously the stroke is way too thick here. Now, if this is helpful for you to see it, fine. But eventually, I would click on this, and so this is a shape that I just made. After you've made it, you can select it and change the properties. So right now the stroke is much too heavy. So I'm going to make it a lot thinner. And also, we don't need this red fill in here. So I'm actually going to turn it off. You don't have to have a fill. So if you click on to change the fill color, you look for the white square with the red slash through it, and that's to have no fill. So now we just have the stroke defining the shape. Now it actually went pretty well going around the shadow here. I'm looking for something a little bit better to show where you might need to turn off the curve on the shape you're making. All right, so let's just say I'm going to kind of trace in here. So this is kind of like a straight line. And then we start getting some curves kind of going around. This is the basic process for this project. And let's just say I have it like this, but I want it to be this sharp point. And you'll see as I do this, it wants to continue this kind of smooth curve. I don't want that, okay? I want it to be maybe it's like kind of like an icicle hanging down, and it needs to be sharp. So right now it's defaulting to being that smooth Bezier curve. I need to turn that off for this specific point. In order to do that, I have to hold down Option on my keyboard. As I click it, you see the cursor changes and gets rid of that red curved line. So I have to hold down Option. On Windows, I believe it's the Alt key. And then as I'm holding down, I'm going to click once on that last anchor point. So now I can continue it. And you see it's this sharp point. Now I know it has a flat end here, and we can get into that later. But you'll notice the path. Now it's this sharp path right here instead of it being this kind of a smooth curve like the others. And same thing here. Let's say I want this to be more jagged, but right now it wants to do something like that, which I don't want. I'm going to hold down Option. I'm going to click on that last anchor point, and now it can be sharp. Same thing here, hold down Option, click on it. Now this one was a little different. It does have the point on it. That's fine. It just, things are being treated a little differently here. And we can see this is the way you get these sharper points. Now again, this goes from here and straight into this straight line, which we don't want a curve like that. So again, hold down Option, click on it, and now we get that straight line back. So if you don't want a curve to continue after you've made a Bezier curve, you have to hold down Option or Alt and click on the last anchor point. All right, so this is where I'd be tracing around here, and as an example, I'll just do this fast. The key is to do it in as few anchor points as possible. You know, I'm looking at these large curves here. This is another example. I need to Option click on that last point so that I can go back to this straight line here instead of it being curved around. And that's the process you're going to do for tracing all of these shapes. I know that may seem like a lot, especially something that's as detailed as this with all these kind of hoses and wires and different boxes and things. This actually can be a pretty complicated image. I don't expect you to trace every single tiny detail. You're going for a general tracing that gets all of the main things. In this case, you know, I would focus on some of the rocks here, getting the basics for the machines and the aurora especially. So if I was to finish, let's say, one specific shape, let me do this circle here. So I'm gonna go pretty quickly through this, just because, and I've been doing this a long time, so I can kind of know how to get the shapes in a better place a little bit faster. And I'm not worried about it being perfect. It needs to be close, of course. We need to get the basic idea and see that the image has been traced. But for this, I'm just going to go very quickly. And let's say I traced out this circle here. Now, right now, I have this yellow line, okay? That's just so I can see the shape that I have traced. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you're not going to have a stroke, you're going to have a filled shape. To make the change after I've made this, this is where, let's say I put a fill back on and I take the stroke off. And then to get the right color, as I select it, and then you can go over to the eyedropper tool, which is keyboard shortcut I. And then anywhere in the image, anywhere you click, whatever the color that pixel is, in this case I'm going to click on one of these gray pixels, it will change that shape to that color. So you can see I can start that way, and I can build up these layers on top of it. So let's say I go through this next one. Again, I'm going to go very quickly for the sake of this demo, and it won't be perfect, but it's fine. click the I on your keyboard or just click on the eyedropper tool. And I'm going to click on a lighter gray this time. Let's put this one back behind it. And this is how you're going to start building up these shapes. Now this one is above that shape, so we see the lighter gray circle in front of the darker gray circle. If you're wanting to check how this will look and if there's something behind it, instead of having to move these objects around every time, it's actually easier to lower the opacity of a layer. So I have this layer selected, again at the top where it says opacity 100%. If I decrease this, or actually, it's the object I have selected. If I decrease the opacity, and I'll do the same thing for the larger circle behind it, I can start to see the background image behind. So I could keep doing that now with this last bit of the whatever this, it's like a vent on this machine. And I'll make it a darker, almost black. And I'll just raise the opacity of these, put this back where it should be. And if I turn off the visibility of the image, you can start seeing the shapes, these flat vector graphics that I'm making. So I know this is tedious, but this is the basic process for eventually building up all these shapes. If I did the same thing, I'm going to go to layer 3 this time. And let's say I do something similar to the aurora. Let me just start over here. I'm going to change this back to no fill. And I'm just going to use the yellow stroke again. Kind of get that curve in there. Option click. It's a little hazy, of course. But we'll get something close to this. And then we'll close it out. And notice, as I made this shape, this basic shape of the aurora, I went over the image. If you want to, and I would recommend, if you want to pull that back in so that it's not coloring outside the lines, basically, this is where you go to your direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A, and you can click on any of these anchor points. So I just clicked on it and I can move it back here without moving the whole thing. Now if I just click and then drag around, you can see it's moving the anchor point without moving the whole shape. So let's say I move this down here. But you'll notice as I move this down to get it underneath the line, it's kind of missing this area at the top. You can also use your direct selection tool to adjust the curve at any time by clicking on the handlebars. So these are called handlebars. Anytime you click on an anchor point that has a Bezier curve, you'll see these handlebars. So in this case, I'm gonna adjust it so that it's flatter, and I'm gonna move it back up to here. If something happens that's really not working, you can do the anchor point tool, which is a keyboard shortcut Shift and C. And then if I want to completely redo this curve, this angle, I can just click once. It removes the Bezier curve, and then I can click and drag it out again. And this is where I can adjust the handles separately instead of with a direct selection tool. When you just go to a handle like this, both handles move together. If I don't want that, I have to use the anchor point tool to separate them. Now I can adjust them individually to get that straight line and still have a curve on one side. All right, so I know we're going over a lot. It's a lot to take in. The last thing for something like this with the Aurora is we want to cover gradients. So a shape like this that doesn't have these sharp lines, it's more of a hazy gradient in the color from the green to maybe purple. It doesn't have to be exact, but I'm going to click on this shape. I'm going to turn on fill, turn off the stroke, and I'm actually going to go to the orange-yellow gradient fill. Click on that, and now I can come to my gradient tool, the gradient window. At the top, you go to Window, click on Gradient, and you can start changing the colors. Now right now, if you double click, these are called stops. So it goes from this yellow to this deep orange. If I click on one of those, double click, I can start choosing the colors. So we'll do something wider and cooler. Maybe something a little bit more purplish. And this is how we're getting the gradients. Now, right now it's a linear gradient from left to right. And we don't want that. We want to be able to adjust it. So I'm going to click on keyboard shortcut G, or on the tool palette there's a gradient tool. This is a little finicky, but you can use this, spin things around and make adjustments to how the gradient looks. So I'm going to try to, just say I shorten it a bit and change how it's laid out. And using the gradient tool, this is where you might start getting things closer to these hazy edges. Now I realize this does not look like the Aurora at all. You would take more time to maybe build the shapes to get it to have a similar effect. But this is still using the linear gradient. You can go up to the freeform gradient. As you add different stops, it gives you a little bit more flexibility. With the type of gradients that you can use. If you feel that the best way for whatever you're doing is to, I have this shape selected, I'm just going to click on the color of the gradient so it's a solid color. Maybe it's still something like you have this basic shape, but then you're building up these other kind of like stripy areas on top of it. Now, in general, I wouldn't recommend something like a Northern Lights scene for your project because it's just a little bit more advanced and it can be very time consuming. But this is some of the options you have for getting that, for how using gradients would be helpful. I could also see using gradients, let's say if I make this shape of this mountain, you can see how it might get darker to lighter, or you get the shadow here. This can also be somewhere that a gradient might be helpful. Instead of making a bunch of shapes for the shadows, I might do the entire mountainside. Actually, let's try it real quick. So let's just say I do very quickly. Option click. I'm not worried about the background at all. Oops. And then I'm going to go to the gradient. Let's just try some of this. Make this one much lighter. So you can see with a mountain like this, it might be easier to use the gradient to have a lighter side and a darker side with shadows instead of drawing out the shadows individually. Okay, so I know this has been a lot. It's kind of, again, a crash course in using the pen tool, using layers, using gradient, getting an AI generated image and putting it into Illustrator. So there's a lot we covered. So this tutorial will be broken up into multiple parts. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to walk you through or any issues that come up, or suggest other tutorials that might show specific helpful points for whatever the issue is that you're experiencing. But please, one way or the other, just send me an email or make a comment so that I can respond and help you work through this process. Eventually, you'll get to something that looks like something like this. These are other past examples. And you can see, the water is pretty detailed, but this is a much more simple design. And naturally, you're going to get flatter shapes. You're not going to have, like, say, the brush, this detail in here. This student kind of made that through these solid shapes here, and then this kind of reflective water. You just see this darker shape here, kind of making these kind of like little spiky areas that are similar to the reflections. Also, this is a good example of the gradient. Instead of this being flat here, it's lighter in the background, darker here. So that was made with the gradient. A lot of people do architectural projects. Some of the detail is lost, but this person also still did a great job of still tracing over and getting the basic shapes and colors. Even in the sky, this is where we see some of the gradients of the clouds. They look like just kind of blobs in the sky, but you zoom out and you understand what's going on. Same here, lots of gradients in the clouds. Now, obviously, this is the original image. There's so much detail, so much texture in this image here, and we don't get that in this one, but it still works out very well because of the use of color, because of the use of the gradients. All right, so hopefully that's helpful, some inspiration of what we're going for. So send me an email if you have any questions, and good luck over the next 2 weeks in getting the project done.